When I joined in 1981, having written the 1980 exam, I had all the choices. Given my high rank, I could have taken any service, and I had given only 3 choices, left the rest of the form blank. My father was in the Indian Police Service, and my mother, having seen some of the difficult, part of the lives that police officers lead, etc., she actually told me from when I was very young that when you grow up, you will join the Indian Foreign Service. Not the IAS, not the IPS, but the IFS. If I didn't join the Foreign Service, I fancied myself as an archaeologist at one point of time. So anyway, I'm just telling you how important it is to have plan A, plan B, plan C, and not to allow any of these plans to unnecessarily unnerve you. The kind of things that today you can do like this on ChatGPT or AI or simply just Googling some facts. But we had to go to libraries, we had to talk to people, we had to fill, physical forms. And so there was a certain era in which I joined, the analog era. You are joining in the digital era or perhaps even the age of AI. In this era, there are various countries operating outside of the normative order in the empirical space. India's foundational objective is and should continue to be rapid economic growth. And so Atmanirbharta is very important. It's a concept related to self-reliance, though not self-sufficiency. So my name is Sujan Chinoy. I am an officer of the Indian Foreign Service of the 1981 batch. I wrote the exam in 1980, and that was a long time ago. In a lighter vein, I should say that I am an extinguished ambassador. There are distinguished ambassadors, but once you retire from the Foreign Service, we pull each other's legs by saying that we are now extinguished. But I'm still working, as you can see. So when I left the Foreign Service after nearly 37.5 years, a long career, I was reappointed an ACC appointment as the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses, earlier known as IDSA. It's still known as IDSA. And some of you may be familiar with IDSA, especially if you're from JNU. So let me say a few words about myself in terms of how I got to where I am, the journey. And the journey begins with my being a young boy from a family in our ancestral hometown of Rajkot. My grandfather was the Diwan of Rajkot state during the princely era. And I grew up in Rajkot, but despite Rajkot being my hometown, I went to a boarding school there. So that was a bit funny. And I went to India's oldest boarding school, a public school as we call it, but it's really a private school. The Rajkumar College, Rajkot, which was set up in 1868 as one of the first of the 3 chiefs colleges, earlier known as the King's Colleges. They were called college, but they were school, really schools in the true sense. And I spent my 10 years there in the boarding school, and I had science subjects, physics, chemistry, and add math. I didn't like these subjects. I got a first division because I worked hard, but I left school with my senior Cambridge, ISC as we called it, at the age of 16.5. And so I was very young when I went to university, and I always wanted to be in the Indian Foreign Service. When she was asking me a while ago, when did I make that choice? At what stage of my career did I decide to become an IFS officer? And I said I was maybe about 7. My father was in the Indian Police Service, and my mother, having seen some of the difficult, part of the lives that police officers lead, etc., she actually told me from when I was very young that when you grow up, you will join the Indian Foreign Service, not the IAS, not the IPS, but the IFS. and it, in her view, was an elite service. Elite in the sense first choice for most of the toppers of that era, and which continued till my time as well. I mean, when I joined in 1981, having written the 1980 exam, I had all the choices. Given my high rank, I could have taken any service, and I had given only 3 choices, left the rest of the form blank. The first choice was the Indian Foreign Service, because I had decided when I was 7 years old and I was realizing my dream. The second choice was the Indian Administrative Service, and had I taken that service, I would have been the youngest in my batch, and I would have got my home cadre, Gujarat, as well, but that was not my first choice. And then my third choice was the Indian Police Service, where I thought I would, enjoy the outdoor life and all the things that go with donning a uniform and things like that. So anyhow, it was decided, and it was in my fate as well to head towards that one and only goal that I had. When I went to university, since I didn't enjoy science subjects, I decided to go in for something that I enjoyed doing, which was reading English literature. I loved reading. I liked to write essays, and I was very good with my descriptions. And so I took English literature when I went to the MS University in Baroda. I enjoyed all the sports there. I was a university blue in swimming, in shooting, in field hockey. I was also into track and field events over there. And reading English literature suggested that I had a little bit of time as well, kind of a little bit more of leisure to pursue my hobbies. Hobbies, there were many. But the goal never left me that I wanted to join the Indian Foreign Service. My subsidiary subjects at one point were archaeology. I actually could visualize myself. If I didn't join the Foreign Service, I fancied myself as an archaeologist at one point of time. And it was a very exciting thought to be digging into the ground, looking for artifacts of millennia past. And so that was something that excited me for a while. My subsidiary subject was psychology, and I excelled at psychology as well. In the evenings, I would spend almost all my time learning the German language. So I did a diploma parallel to my university degree. I did only 3 years of university, though in those days it was pre-university, first year, second year, and third year. But since I had done senior Cambridge, at 16 and a half, I went into the first year of college. And so I graduated by the time I was 19. But the clock wasn't ticking fast enough for me. I was at 19 a graduate, and I said, I want to join the Foreign Service. That's always been my goal. And I was told that I'll have to wait for another 2 years, and I should prepare because I was too young to write the exam. And so meanwhile, I'd done my National Cadet Corps. I was a senior under officer, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. I wanted to be in the NCC only to be part of the infantry. So when I did my senior certificate NCC, and I was the top cadet senior under officer of Gujarat, I was also offered a commission in the summer of 1977. And the CEO there at the 3rd Gujarat Battalion NCC said, here's your letter, and in 11 months, you go to the IMA, you will be commissioned as an officer. The regular course was 18 months, but for someone coming through the C certificate stream, it was only 11 months. So I thought that was one of my fallback options, but it didn't remain a fallback for long because I had to take a split decision there. And I was nowhere near 20 yet. So I decided that I would stick to my original goal. But when I finished in 1978 with my graduation, I obviously had to do something for 2 years. And I decided to do an MBA, a master's, with the idea that it might give me some time to prepare. I shifted from Baroda to Ahmedabad, and I did my MBA, but also to have a fallback option that should I not make it to the Foreign Service, and having already declined to join the army, it would be a good idea to get a job in the private sector. So anyway, I'm just telling you how important it is to have plan A, plan B, plan C. and not to allow any of these plans to unnecessarily unnerve you if you fail to achieve one of them. There's always something else that you can move into seamlessly. So that's where we are. I got into the Foreign Service on my first attempt. My choice of language was a very conscious choice. I took Chinese as my area of specialization in an era in which China was not quite the power that it is today. It was as poor as a church mouse in those days. Well, there were many poor countries, and India was also relatively poor. Incidentally, our GDP was the same in 1950. It was the same when I wrote the exam in 1980. By 2000, China's GDP was twice as much as India's. By 2010, it was 4 times as much. And by 2018, it was nearly 6 times as much. Now that we are growing at a faster clip, and China's rate of growth has come down, that gap has kind of closed, but they are so far ahead in some ways with an economy of 19 to 20 trillion US dollars that despite our now being the 4th largest economy, soon to be the 3rd largest, the gap between the 2nd and the 3rd is bigger than the gap between the 1st and the 2nd. So between $30 trillion, that's the US, and $20 trillion, that's China, the gap is smaller than the gap between number 2 and number 3. Be that as it may, I think lots has changed since I went to Mussoorie. The world has changed. And I think today, you as a group of young aspirants aspiring to join the civil services, regardless of which service you choose to join, you are living in a very different world. Because in many ways, I think I joined the civil services in the analog age when we still relied on lectures, we relied on visiting libraries, bringing a stack of books back to your home or your room in order to read things. The syllabus was printed somewhere, someone shared it with you. We were still not in the full-bloom era of cyclostyling, photocopies either. So you had to make notes. Somebody could show you something for a while and you would quickly copy the 25 books that someone has advised you to read on sociology the way I was advised to read. Incidentally, I took psychology and sociology as my subjects. Psychology was one subject I had read briefly as a minor subject, but sociology was something that was entirely new to my life, and I took it on a whim and a fancy. I didn't want to take literature because I was so good at it. I was on a scholarship, but sometimes when you are good at something, you feel a little nervous about that subject, and I didn't want to go through the same syllabus and read the same things over and over again. I wanted some excitement, and the challenge was to take a new subject, and someone just suggested, why don't you take sociology? You like reading, don't you? I said, yes. It says, so here's the syllabus. There are 25 books. These are standard, gold standard books for sociology. You read them. And so I read those books backwards, once, twice, thrice. I didn't make notes. So I know that the, style of keeping notes is a very good thing to do. And I can see you following that very healthy habit. But I simply preferred to read things over and over again, or to scan it again a 3rd time, 4th time. There were doubts in my mind. I would go back to some points, and the kind of things that today you can do like this on ChatGPT or AI, or simply just Googling some facts. But we had to go to libraries. We had to talk to people. We had to fill, physical forms. And so there was a certain era in which I joined, the analog era. You are joining in the digital era, or perhaps even the age of AI. Preparations, therefore, are of a different order altogether. Language learning for me, for example, was physical at that point of time. Even when I took Chinese as my subject and went to Hong Kong, there were 2 of us, both batchmates. I finished my innings as the senior most Indian ambassador globally for 1 year, between 2017 December and 2018 December, I was the senior most of the 150 ambassadors globally. I was in Japan. My own colleague Vijay Gokhale had then become foreign secretary. The two of us had gone to Hong Kong to learn the Chinese language. Now, it was the age of books and, physical lessons, and I had spent a lot of my pocket money while at university on Lingvaphones. How many of you have heard of Lingvaphone? Lingvaphone is a company that actually gave you records and books to learn foreign languages. And while I was at university, I'd already ordered Japanese and French, and I used to teach myself these languages. But I did Chinese in a very formal setting, like I'd done my German. And the time given to us was 2 years for Chinese as diplomats. I was posted in Hong Kong. I finished in 1 year, and they quickly posted me to Beijing. Vice late Sri Pravesh Chandra of the 1972 batch. And in the Foreign Service, that's the beauty. These are interchangeable jobs. A senior counselor or first secretary can be replaced by a second secretary. I had to tell the government not to post me out of Hong Kong, because I said, you give us 2 years to study the language. So what if I have finished it in 1 year? Allow me another year as per the normal entitlement, and I'll do a better job of Chinese, because that will be in the interest of the government as well. And government agreed to do that. So anyhow, my career path has essentially been centered around East Asia, China. I finished my career as ambassador to Japan. And I had been a student in Japan before I joined the Foreign Service. So at the end of 38 years, I'm in a slightly different yet related field, dealing with defense, national security, and IR in its entirety. The world has changed, as I said. The confidence that we all had in the rules-based international order as represented by the United Nations, which was set up in the aftermath of the Great War, the Second World War. I shouldn't use the term Great War. Remember, the Great War actually refers to the First World War. But nevertheless, the Second World War was also a great war. It killed millions of people. And when the UN was set up, it was the only thing we had which would keep peace, prosperity, and development in mind. But obviously, it was also inherently unequal, because the Faustian bargain, as they say, was that the United States and UK, who had been working on the Atlantic Charter in 1941, which segued into the making of the UN Charter in 1945, had also decided on having a UN Security Council with permanent membership and non-permanent membership. And that was the bargain, that the have-nots would get the UN Charter and a UN, provided everybody agreed to have a UN Security Council with permanent membership. In many ways, I think the world is paying a price for that imperfection that was introduced in the UN at that stage, because the UN never was able to truly reform itself. The only time that they thought of reforms was in 1964, when ECOSOC discussed this for a year, and in 1965, the non-permanent category was expanded from 6 to 10, taking the total membership from 11 to 15. And there has been no change thereafter to the UN Security Council, despite there being what you call intergovernmental negotiations and text-based negotiations, at least since 2008. But it's the same story. The unwillingness of the vested powers that occupy the veto power and permanent seats, unwillingness to reform in favor of a flatter organization. But the frustrations are not just for, the countries that are not seated in the UN Security Council. Today, I think there is ample evidence that a preeminent power like the United States of America, one of the curators of the UN system, a country that midwifed the UN normative order, rules-based order into existence, is also frustrated with that order. Because in creating that order, willy-nilly, the US also had to concede a certain amount of space to others. The creation of the UN General Assembly, one country, one vote, meant that the Republic of Marshall Islands, a tiny island country in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, had the same voting power as the United States of America. And the US, I think, as today kind of symbolized by President Trump, has also reached the conclusion that the rules-based international order has been gamed by others to acquire a certain amount of agency and equalizing power at the cost of the United States of America, because the US has self-introspection and self-appraisal of it still being a hyperpower, which it is. It is the largest economy. It has the most formidable military power, expeditionary capabilities, which it can project in any part of the world. And so I think in a president like President Trump, a conclusion has been reached that, yes, we agree that order created in 1945 is an imperfect order. Not so much because the US is not in the Security Council or that it does not have a veto power. Our frustrations are different. But their frustration is that in the UN Security Council, others like Russia and China can form a tandem against the US or against the Anglo-Saxon combined there. The typical three that work together, at least worked in the past. Now you are seeing fissures between the United States and the Europeans as well. But that they have gamed the system, that the US is not able to have the same kind of agency that it naturally can, if it wished to, outside the normative order in the empirical order. The empirical order is not within the framework of the United Nations. The empirical order is the order in which the greatest changes have taken place as you moved from the analog into the digital age, or from the era of closed economies, whether in China or India, to the one that we see today, a globalized world, a flatter world, a kind of compact global village, etc. So in the empirical order, you find that US is now willing to act and to play out its primacy as the reigning hegemon, a full-bloom demonstration of its economic and military power. And it is doing this at every conceivable opportunity. And it has obviously been doing it without any kind of distinction between friend or foe, between alliance partners, whether it's transatlantic, whether it is trans-Pacific, or whether it's foe, as in traditional, rivals like Russia or China, whether it is partners like India, whether it is rivals or potential adversaries like China or Russia, or whether it is treaty alliance partners like the Europeans. The Americans have shed that inhibition and are demonstrating the full extent of their economic and military capabilities in the outside of the normative framework in the empirical space. But mind you, and I'll stop at that, India is also a country that is operating largely today with its sights on the empirical order. India is a country that values the United Nations. We, like many others, abide by the UN Charter. We value the contributions, but it is a fact that the UN has not reformed itself, and we haven't found our true calling as a preeminent power seated at the high table in the UN Security Council as a permanent member. And that may not happen. It may never happen because of vested interests. But the world has not remained static. It is changing rapidly. We have seen that over the last 40 years, traditional engines of economic growth have shifted from the Americas and Europe to the Asian landmass, particularly to the Asia Pacific, and then in the opening decade and since of this century, not limited to the Asia Pacific, has spread to a wider region now known as the Indo-Pacific, with many more people, many more countries partaking of that prosperity. In such a world, India has also been growing. It's been finding its feet as the fastest growing economy in the world, one on which the world is also betting for the long-term future. Not just because it has potential for economic growth, but also because of what it represents as a democracy, what it has by way of confidence in its strategic autonomy. In a world of binary choices, a country like India has been astutely avoiding having to join camps, whether it is the US-led or whether it is China-led. And we've been trying to actually chart out a course for ourselves where, without compromising on our strategic autonomy, on what traditionally was known as non-alignment, we are able to also point the world beyond binary choices, beyond the contestation of major power conflict, in the direction of a values-based future for humanity. That is where India has tried to, in the empirical order, use its newfound economic resources and strength for its own good, but potentially for the regional good. When you have proposals like Sagar to Mahasagar, what does it indicate to you? It indicates that India is no longer thinking in terms of a limited space called Sagar. Sagar basically defines the immediate neighborhood of the Indian Ocean, largely. But when you speak of Mahasagar and you look at the vocabulary that goes into Mahasagar, you are talking about transcending your own region and looking at other regions as well. And in terms of our soft power, in terms of our new economic resources, whereby we are no longer a recipient of what you call, developmental assistance, but also one that is capable of giving developmental assistance to various parts of the world. In Africa's case, we are, for example, a very large provider of assistance, going up to US, dollars 10 to 12 billion. In Afghanistan, we ended up, before the Taliban came in, as one of the largest donors, largest stakeholders, with about $3 to $3.5 billion worth of projects out there. So I want to basically leave you with the idea, before we engage in a conversation, that in this era, there are various countries operating outside of the normative order in the empirical space. I'm trying to frame this for you as part of my own thought process. I have spoken and written about this. But in this empirical order, you have the likes of the United States entering that space and demonstrating their own, national interests and objectives, and using every means available at their disposal to achieve their own ends for different reasons. And a country like India is in this empirical space, in my view, as potentially an objective, a strategically autonomous player that is promoting its own interests, but also pointing the world towards a better choice. 2 days ago, you might have read Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's speech in Davos. And when I read it, when I heard it, I said, but this is what India has been saying for the last several years. There's nothing dramatically new in what he has said about the need to be autonomous, about the need to be objective, about the need to point the world in a different direction, and not normalize economic and military coercion and tariffs and arbitrariness and things like that. Anyone in India writing the speech today for the Prime Minister of India would have written a similar speech, and perhaps such a speech, if you do a comparison, resonates very well with what has been said by India for long. So I have every reason to believe that your generation, as you move ahead in the next 20, 30, 40 years, whether as civil servants or in whatever walk of life you choose, India will be able to contribute much more to the global discourse, because so far we have held our own. We have believed in the fundamental principles of peace, of development, and things like that, but we've also kept our powder dry. In an uncertain world, a world in which there is so much flux, there is so much of multi-alignment, there is kind of more hedging than before. Everybody is keeping their options open, and so must India. But I think currently we are doing the right thing by not kind of falling into place as per the expectations of others. Whether it is China, whether it is the United States, we will have to be careful. I think India's foundational objective is and should continue to be rapid economic growth. There is no option other than that, because unless you have rapid economic growth, unless you have a substantial increase in your per capita GDP, percolating down to the last man, woman, and child, as in the concept of Antyodaya and Gandhiji's ideas, leaving no one behind, which is what government is also trying to do. We have to, use that to ensure that we then have the necessary means to develop our own R&D, to possess our own technology, to have agency over supply chains, to not be unduly dependent on anyone that can manipulate or weaponize either trade or technology, and also to, at the end of the day, ensure that we have the necessary military means to defend ourselves. And so Atmanirbharta is very important. It's a concept related to self-reliance, though not self-sufficiency. There is gap between self-reliance and self-sufficiency, which allows you to collaborate with the rest of the world, but which also insists that when you collaborate with the rest of the world, it should be on equal terms. When you bring in foreign investment, it must necessarily come with technology as well. It must necessarily give a shot in the arm to Indian industry. IP must be created in India, retained in India. You must allow MSMEs and SMEs in India to become part of the vendor chain. When Suzuki came in, for example, nearly 40 years ago, they also brought Japanese best practices. They brought their vendor chain into India. And we never believed it that the automotive industry could change so dramatically. Perhaps the same thing will be repeated when the bullet train project finally comes of age in India. High-speed rail will change once and for all for the better. The industry itself will be forced to make that quantum jump to the next level. But that's because these technologies will also be available in India. So we have to be mindful of the potential for weaponization of trade, technology, supply chains today, and keep all that in mind as we forge our own, charter our own path ahead. But I'll stop there because I was told by Pooja that this is largely an interactive session, and I think I've said enough about myself. And I'm waiting to hear from you and hoping to answer any questions that you might have about the Foreign Service, a service which I represent, though I have myself left it about 7 years ago. But you can take an Indian out of India, but you can't take India out of that Indian. So you can't really take the Foreign Service out of me. So here I am and happy to engage with you. Thank you very much.